So welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk. So I'm Nick O'Leary. I'm a developer advocate at IBM, and I'm the project lead for NodeRED, one of the projects of the JS Foundation. So before I get started, because it really helps me sort of understand where I'm pitching this talk, how much I want to spend on various bits, by show of hands, who has never tried NodeRED? Perfect. But that's goodness. It means I get to show you something new and get you all excited. So what is NodeRED? So it's a flow-based programming tool for the Internet of Things. Well, really, it's flow-based programming for whatever you want to use it for. We just happen to use it for IoT-type scenarios a lot, and some of what I'm going to show you today is a lot about IoT. But it could just as well be used for any sort of event-driven application. It's a Node.js application. You point your web browser at it, and you get what you can see there, which is the NodeRED Editor. Within that editor, you drag nodes on, and each node represents some sort of functionality. You wire them together, and you have your application. A bit of the history of the project. So it was created by myself and a colleague back in 2013 when we were both part of the IBM's Emerging Technologies group. Really is just a little side project to learn more about Node, to learn more about some sort of browser visualization stuff. And it very quickly turned into quite a useful tool for the sorts of projects we were doing, client projects around IoT. So we very quickly, quicker than we were expecting, managed to convince the powers that be at IBM that we wanted to do this as an open source project. And the best way to move forward would be to just get it onto GitHub and build a community around it. And that's what happened later in 2013. And it has grown quite a nice user community around it, to the point where in 2015, NodeRED got added to the default Raspbian image on the Raspberry Pi, the small-scale computer, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and I've got a few of them dotted on the stage, see if you can spot them. And then in 2016, NodeRED was contributed as one of the founding projects of the JS Foundation when the JS Foundation was founded in October that year. And then in, February this year, we hit 1 million all-time installs from the NPM stats. And we continue to see a nice, healthy growth within the project. So it's about flow-based programming. What is flow-based programming? I hear you all shouting. So it's a model of programming actually invented by IBM, coincidentally. I learned this fact about 3 years into the project. And it's all around this idea of being able to create your program by joining individual asynchronous processes that each process just is very singularly focused on a task. It's given some data, it does some work, and it just passes it on to whoever might be listening. And each of those sort of processes is a black box. It doesn't know who comes before it or who's after it. It just does its work and passes the data on. Being a visual tool, it's quite accessible to programmers and non-programmers alike. And one of the things we like to talk around is there is an audience of user for NodeRED who, I'd say, aren't seasoned programmers. And we liken it to the Office suite of applications. There are these tools you have that are accessible to everyone for whether you're editing words, manipulating numbers, arranging ideas. And the user base ranges from someone who just wants to write a letter to someone who actually understands how you do pivot tables and balance all their books. These are tools that are accessible to a wide range of users. And in IoT in particular, in event-driven applications, you have this sort of mass of events, both physical events, sensor data, things like that, but also online events. Someone mentions you on Twitter or whatever it might be. And we wanted to create some sort of tooling that helped make it accessible to create applications to bridge those things together. So you have a NodeRED flow. So you have the nodes that represent the functionality and messages passed between them. The messages are just JavaScript objects, key value pairs, sort of revealing some of its heritage as being primarily focused on MQTT messaging in the very early days, by convention, those objects have a payload property. And that's where we say the interesting information goes. So most nodes will look at the payload of the message it receives to do its operate, or do whatever work it needs to do. But it's a free-form JavaScript object, so any other properties can be added or removed. For example, we have in the default palette a sentiment analysis node that you pass it a message saying, Jedi are totally amazing. It does sentiment analysis on that text because it knows to look in the payload, and it adds this extra property called sentiment, having decided that that's nice positive sentiment, so it gives it a score of 4. So what are these nodes in a NodeRED flow? Each node is represented by two things, a JavaScript file and an HTML file. The JavaScript file is a node module that gets loaded into the node runtime. The HTML file is what gets loaded into the editor. So the JavaScript file defines the runtime behavior, and the HTML defines its appearance and the configuration properties, its help text, all that sort of stuff. And they then get packaged up as a node module. And in the package.json, if someone publishes it with these extra bits of metadata, so two key things. One is a keyword of NodeRED, and then a NodeRED section, which identifies what files are in this package that contain NodeRED nodes. When that gets published to NPM, we then trawl the search for the keyword NodeRED, and as long as we pull it down, examine it, make sure it just meets some basic criteria, and then it gets indexed on the NodeRED website as an extra node that someone can install. And at the current point in time, when did I take this screenshot? I think recent enough. There's 1,660 third-party nodes available for NodeRED. And just demonstrating the power of that decision to open source it and build a community around it, that's 1,600 nodes that we would still be writing number 300 if it was just Dave and I doing this as our own little project. I'm whizzing through this because there's a demo I want to get to, and as long as the demo gods are smiling on me. Being node-based, it runs just as happily on small devices like a Raspberry Pi as it does in the cloud. Obviously, IBM Cloud, it's there as one of our quick start applications, so you can get going with NodeRED in the IBM Cloud in seconds. But on NodeRED.org, there are instructions for getting it going on all the other cloud providers. Because it runs just as happily on devices as it does in the cloud, there are companies who are commercializing it. These are just a small sample. When we talk about devices, people putting it in industrial edge controllers and using NodeRED as sort of the user interface to controlling that device. In the cloud, Hitachi, a particular call out too, they are a very large contributor to the project. And in fact, Yoko-san is doing a talk straight after this in one of the other rooms about some of the contributions they've made to the project. Sense Technic, a local company, Vancouver-based, they were very early on getting involved with the project, and they provide hosted NodeRED services. One in particular we were particularly excited about just last week announced, Particle, who are an IoT device manufacturer. They have announced their IoT rules engine as part of their tooling based on NodeRED. So again, it sort of shows the power of that decision to open source it and build a community around it. We're seeing lots and lots of people take it and use it in new and interesting ways. So that was really fast, and I'm actually going to try and do a demo to try and explain more of the sorts of things you can do. So quickly want to introduce a bit of some of the hardware I've got in front of me. So here I have a Raspberry Pi, which hopefully you're kind of familiar with, but I have plugged in it a Sense hat, which if you haven't come across before, it's got a 8x8 grid of LEDs, it's got motion sensors, it's got environmental sensors, and it's got a little joystick with a button. Hopefully, those who chose to sit right at the back will be able to see some of what goes on up here. If not, believe me, it all worked perfectly. Don't believe what the people at the front say. So, here we go. Let's make sure. Okay, that's confusing me. One sec. Let's close that. What can you see? That's not the window I want you to see. This is the window. So here we have the NodeRED Editor running on the Raspberry Pi. I've already got a flow deployed on it, which is a really useful flow when you're doing demos. It's a flow that's listening for the joystick button on the Raspberry Pi. When I press it, it runs the hostname command and then sends it to the display. So when I press the button, upside down, it scrolls the IP address of the device on the screen, which is really useful when you're trying to talk to it on a network that you've got no other display. So the number of times I deploy changes without that flow, and then I can't talk to my device anymore because I don't know what IP address it's got. Anyway, I digress. So here we have the palette of nodes down the side that represent all the different capabilities. This is pretty much the default set of nodes, but I have got some extra ones added in. So, for example, the node for the SenseHat device. It's got motion events, environment events, joystick events. I'm just going to do, to begin with, motion events. And we can wire that to a debug node. The debug node is a really useful one. So I hit deploy. That's now running. And if I switch to the debug sidebar, you can now see this continual stream of messages. And unfortunately, so for the motion events, it's doing, I think, 10 a second, which kind of makes it a little unwieldy to watch. So we can just drop in a delay node and tell it to rate limit our messages, and let's just do one every 5 seconds and drop the ones in between. Deploy that. So now every 5 seconds, there we go, every 5 seconds it's passing through a message. And in this sidebar, we can expand it to have a look at what data we've received. So we've received a message with a payload, with acceleration data, gyroscope data, orientation. And what we're going to do is a little flow that checks when I violently shake the Raspberry Pi, because that's just cruel. So to do that, we add a switch node. So just like you can do in JavaScript, a switch statement, we want to have a look at message.payload. In fact, we come over here, and we're going to look at the y-axis of acceleration. And I can copy the path to that element to my clipboard and just paste it in, because that's the property we want to do a check on. And we say if it's greater than the number 2, pass the message through. So now when we deploy that and clear the sidebar, there are no messages. But if I shake this in the right way, and when you pick one axis, you've got to make sure yeah, there we go. That's the axis. The messages pass through. So we want to do something when that happens. So I'm going to drop in a change node. The change node lets you set properties on the messages passing through. And we're going to set that to the command that the SenseHat display will recognize, and then wire that to the SenseHat output node. So that, when I shake it, will make the SenseHat display go red. But we don't want it just to go red, we perhaps want it to turn off after a few seconds. So I'm just going to get rid of that debug node. So to do that, we can fork the flow and add a trigger node. And tell the trigger node when it receives a message, don't do anything to begin with. Let's say wait 2 seconds, not milliseconds or you won't notice, and then send the string, again, the command for the SenseHat off. And I tick this box to extend the delay, so if I keep shaking it, it won't send that message. And then I wire that in. And I hit deploy. So now, it's gone red. Hopefully you can see that. And after a couple of seconds, it's gone off. Yes? Yes, it's working. Good. Demo's working. But that's the easy bit of the demo because it doesn't rely on the conference Wi-Fi. The next bit of the demo does. So this is what NodeRED's about. It's dragging on nodes, being able to wire them together, build your application very quickly without writing a single line of code. Now, there are some developers who say, well, I know how to write code to do that. I'm not fazed by that. But, in the however long I've been speaking, in probably the 3 minutes since I started this demo, I've built that application without having to write a single line of code. I have something productive very quickly. We can also do things like, let's grab the SenseHat node, and this time we're going to get the environment data, and we get one of those once a second. And I'm going to drop in a node for the What's an IoT Platform. And it's configured in quick start mode, so I don't have to do anything on the platform. I can just click that button, and it's opened up a dashboard for this device with that unique randomly generated ID. Hit done, hit deploy. You can see the status tells me I'm connected, and if I switch over here, you can now see that's live data coming from that device without a single line of code written. So the palette is full of lots of useful nodes. There are nodes for HTTP endpoints, so you can create REST APIs very quickly. MQTT, as I say, that's sort of some of the heritage of where NodeRED came from. Nodes for TCP, UDP, lots of transports, and then lots of useful function nodes that can go in the middle of the flow, including, quite literally, the function node. And the function node lets me actually write JavaScript if there isn't a node that does exactly what I want. I can drop in some custom JavaScript in the middle of a flow as well to manipulate the messages as they pass through. Right, I think that's everything I was meant to tell you at this point of the talk. We'll soon find out if I'm wrong. So one of the things we added earlier in the year is the projects feature in NodeRED. So from what you saw, each time I edited something and I hit deploy, that's sending the changes to my Raspberry Pi, and they're written to a file. And there's no versioning there. Just whatever I deploy is live and is what's running. So earlier in this year, we introduced the projects feature, which is turned off by default but can be easily enabled. And it means when you're in the NodeRED editor, you're editing effectively a Git repository. And that Git repository can have your flow files in, but it can have lots of other resources to go along with it. So, so I have up on GitHub an example NodeRED project, which I'm going to use for this demo. Before I do, I want to introduce another little bit of hardware, which is quite cool and relevant. It's the Puckojs. So who's heard of Esprino? To be honest, the lights are so bright, I have no idea if anyone's put their hands up. This tiny little device in my hands is a Bluetooth LE button that runs JavaScript. So at the moment, and it's got a button. You may hear me clicking it. It's got a whole bunch of digital I/O on it, and it's got some LEDs. What I'm going to do here is switch to so this is the Esprino Web IDE. I've got some JavaScript I want to put on this device that just adds some simple logic that mucks around with its BLE advertising. So here's where we cross our fingers, scanning. Come on, all you with Fitbits in the audience are disrupting my demo. There we are. There's the puck. We pair. It's writing the data. So that's just programmed this in my hand. Right. I've lost the mouse. Can I have my mouse back? So I've done that bit, So what did that code do? Let's see if this is going to hopefully show up. Oh, look, there's me. So now, when I press the button once, it goes red. When I press it twice, it goes green. And when I press it 3 times, it goes blue. Hopefully you can just about make out those colors. They're washed out. That's nothing to do with NodeRED. It's just a cool little JavaScript thing. But we're going to start doing something with NodeRED using that device. What else did I have to say? There we go. Blank slide. That means demo. Let's go back to the demo. So we talk about NodeRED projects. In the great fashion, here's one I prepared earlier. Here is a Git repository with a NodeRED project in, which has got a whole bunch of stuff for this demo. So I'm going to grab the Git URL for it. And then in NodeRED, I'm going to create a new project. Yeah, throw away these changes. Clone repository. Paste in the URL. I've already set up the SSH keys in NodeRED to be able to clone from GitHub. So that's pulling down the project from GitHub. Because we encrypt credentials, it's currently telling me where it's cloned it, but it can't run it because it doesn't know how to decrypt the credentials. So I try and remember what password I used when I set this up. There we go. So that's provided at the encryption key so it can safely decrypt the credentials. And there you have pretty much the flow I had previously. One key difference, though, is this IoT node is now connected to the Watson IoT platform as a proper registered device. So here's the Watson IoT platform. Go to the devices. And you can hopefully see NolePi 3, which is that device there, has got a little green dot. The other two Pis are sat on the shelf over there, and we'll come to those, hopefully, in the next 8 minutes and 55 seconds. So what we want to do is to get the Puck controlling that Pi. So again, in true fashion, knowing you didn't want to just watch me programming in front of you, I can just import some stuff I've already built. So this is what we call in NodeRED a subflow. And if I open this up, it's sort of a template flow. And this is set up to run, automatically run whenever NodeRED starts up. And it runs a command, captures its output, and passes it on. This is using a little daemon I've written for the Pi that's listening for the Bluetooth LE and just passing on the events it gets. So that's what this Puck remote node is doing. In fact, let's just show that doing something. So we wire that to a debug node. We want to see the full message. So now, oh, there we go. So that, here we go. So these are all Bluetooth LE devices in the room that are advertising features. As I say, probably a lot of these are Fitbits and things like that. But if I press this button once, haha, come on. Oh, is this gonna, where are you? Ah, no, this went wrong earlier, and I remember why. Because the ID is still bound to this device, which stops anyone else seeing it. Let's try again. There we go. So 18OF is this device. And you can see here, it had a payload of 10, followed by a payload of 0. If I press it twice, we should see a 20. We should see it. There we go. A 20, followed by a 0. Come on. OK, I'm just going to go on to the next one. 3 times, we get a 30. So that means we've got a NodeRED flow that can now see this device. And let's do something with that. And here's a flow I already created, which has a switch node looking for the ID of this device. So you guys can't override the demo with your BLE devices. A switch node that looks at the value for 0, 10, 20, and 30 and splits the flow out. And then I set a color accordingly and pass it to the sense hat. So let's deploy that. Now, fingers crossed, if I press it once, it's gone red. If I press it twice, it's gone green. If I press it 3 times, it goes blue. That's quite cool. Again, with very little programming done in front of you, but a fairly straightforward flow. So what about those devices over there in my last remaining 6 minutes? Well, let's find my slides. This is kind of the interesting part of the demo from my perspective, because this is kind of new stuff playing around with. So at the moment, I've got this one device connected to the IBM cloud publishing its data, and I was editing the flows directly on that device. And that's great for just doing a demo or working on a single device, but that's not so great when I'm perhaps working on an IoT solution where maybe I've got 10,000 of these, and I don't want to be pointing my web browser at all 10,000, updating them. So what we're going to do is create a solution that, as a developer, I develop on the one device, And then I want to automatically be able to push whatever I develop on this device out to a fleet of other devices. And to do that, I'm going to use Resin.io. So Resin is a cool web service that helps you manage fleets of IoT devices using Docker containers. And the way it works is you git push to Resin from your one device. It builds a Docker container and then automatically deploys that out to all your other devices. And you end up with all your devices talking up to the IBM cloud. Let's get the ball rolling on that, because sometimes it decides to take a few minutes longer than it should. So here we have NodeRED. What we're going to do is go into the project settings, and here you can see the Git remote from GitHub. We're going to add a new Git remote, and here's my Resin dashboard, which helpfully gives me the Git URL I need to push to. You can see the two devices, White Snow and Divine Pine. They randomly generate their device names. Those are the two Raspberry Pis on the shelf over there, and you can see they are online, which is always reassuring at this point of the demo. We're going to create a remote called Resin, drop in the URL. Cool. And then we go to the version control tab of NodeRED. You can see a Git view. You can see the flow file has changed. It can give you a nice diff of showing you what has changed between what's currently in version control and what's not. If you're happy with that, you stage it, you commit it. So you can see all the different commits in this project. So here I can push back up to GitHub. In the interest of time, I am going to just go straight for the push to Resin master. And here's where everyone just needs to, I won't say hold your breath, because there's like 3 minutes remaining. That is going to run away in the background for a little while. The reason being, when you do the git push, Resin's now rebuilding my Docker container. If you want to see what that really looks like, where's my mouse? Come on. No. So this is what it looked like if I did it from the command line. Building this demo, I realized we don't give enough feedback when we do some of the Git interactions within NodeRED, because Resin spit a lot out to the console, showing you its progress. So it pushes up, it pulls down the previous images it's built for your application. So even this video is taking way too long. It's all right, I've got a whole 2 minutes and 8 seconds. Yeah, running a Docker build, and then uploading the images, and then Resin show you a nice reinsuring unicorn, if everything works. And I just think it's a great shame that in NodeRED we don't also show you said unicorn. But that appears to have pushed. The spinner has disappeared, and if I just switch back to my browser, and I go to the Resin.io dashboard, you can now see both of those devices have gone to updating state. Now, Resin have an optional feature where you can tell it to only push binary diffs of your Docker containers down, so it's really efficient, which is great if you're just changing the odd thing in a flow file, and great for a demo when you've only got 1 minute and 8 seconds left. Sometimes it decides to re-download the whole 200 meg image, which blew my data allowance when I was doing this tethered to my mobile phone in the hotel a couple nights ago. We'll see, see what happens if we go into one of these devices. Still downloading, still updating. Oh, but it's doing it the quick version. Awesome. So we just need to, so this top right window are the logs from the Docker container running on one of those devices. In the last 29 seconds, I just need to see NodeRED started, and then I will be happy. The applause will be rapturous when it all finishes. Sorry, inner monologue, sorry. Cool. So that's NodeRED running on that device. Let's just double check it's now running on the other one. Come on, don't fail me now. OK, we're just going to go for it. So now, I click it once. That's gone red. That's gone red. The other one's still updating. I click it twice. That's hopefully gone green. You get the idea. It's mostly worked. Oh, that one's gone blue. Bluetooth LE, yeah. Anyway, point being, developing in NodeRED with version control, using Resin, so I've pushed out to production. That could be 10,000 devices spread around the world, deployed from within NodeRED in a proper version-controlled and managed way. If you want to play with more, I'm going to skip through the slides about what we're doing in the project, but we're doing lots. Do come get involved. If you want to find out more, come grab me, NodeRED.org. We're a very friendly community. Thank you.